Imagine having, like, a PhD in astrophysics.
Yeah.
You are brilliant, articulate, and deeply respected by your peers.
Right, you got this entire established identity.
Exactly. But then you cross a border, you open your mouth, and suddenly you sound, and honestly, you're treated like a very confused toddler.
Oh yeah, it's jarring.
It really is. Your entire personality, your intellect, your wit, it all just kind of vanishes into the ether simply because you lack the local vocabulary to express it.
And that shift, that humiliating shift, is the silent reality for millions of adults navigating the world every single day.
Right. So today, we are unpacking a source that dives into a deeply common, incredibly heavy, but almost entirely unspoken side effect of learning a new language.
Yeah, we are looking at profound, isolating loneliness.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
And it's the great unacknowledged shadow of language acquisition, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, we spend an enormous amount of time analyzing the cognitive mechanics, right? Like space repetition, syntax mapping, phone recognition.
All the technical stuff.
Exactly. But we entirely ignore the emotional toll. And it is a toll that requires just a massive amount of psychological resilience to endure.
Because the grammar is only half the battle.
Yeah, exactly. The cognitive challenge is just one piece. The emotional isolation is what actually causes most learners to just quit.
And the moment we mention that word loneliness, if you were learning a language right now, you know exactly the feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
It's that really specific, quiet sensation of standing in a crowded room. You are completely surrounded by fluent speakers.
They're all laughing, firing off jokes.
Right, they're building connections, and yet you feel like you're standing behind soundproof glass.
Like you're physically taking up space, but you aren't really in the room with them.
It's a very specific, paradoxical type of isolation,
It is, because physical solitude is one thing, but being surrounded by the exact human connection you desperately want and just watching it happen in real time, inches out of your reach, that makes the loneliness feel exponentially sharper.
It really highlights the deficit.
Exactly.
Our source material captures the mechanics of this with an analogy that just immediately grounded this feeling for me.
Oh, the train analogy.
Yeah, the train. It compares an active, fast-paced conversation in a new language to a moving train.
Right.
So you're standing on the platform, you hear the conversation coming, and you know exactly what you want to add to it.
But by the time you've actually managed to construct your sentence in your head...
Right. By the time you've chased down the right verb tense and assembled the vocabulary, the doors have closed.
The conversation train has already left the station.
And you are left standing on the platform with, like, a perfectly conjugated sentence that is now 10 seconds too late.
Yeah, that moving train analogy is just a brilliant way to conceptualize the reality of cognitive lag.
Because it explains the actual mechanics of what is happening in the brain, right?
Exactly. Your working memory is basically acting as a bottleneck. I mean, it takes a native speaker milliseconds to retrieve a word from their lexicon.
But for a learner,
retrieving that same exact word requires conscious, deliberate search through neural pathways that just aren't fully paved yet.
so by the time the search is complete, the social context has moved on.
Yeah. You didn't just miss a chance to practice a past participle. You missed a moment of human connection.
Oh, wow. That's a gut punch.
It is. And when that phenomenon repeats itself like 50 times a day, it aggregates into this heavy emotional weight. Nobody prepares you for the sheer grief of that when you buy your first flashcards.
Grief is a really strong word, but it actually feels accurate when we look at the deeper psychological impact our sources describe.
Absolutely.
Because missing that conversational train repeatedly, it literally alters your sense of self. You know who you are, you have layers.
Right, you can be sarcastic or deeply philosophical.
Yeah, or instantly comforting to a friend.
Yeah.
But when you can't express any of those nuances, it feels like the world is only getting to meet this tiny, distilled fraction of who you are.
Like the real you is trapped behind a language barrier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And everyone else just gets to meet this, like, smaller version of you who mostly just nods and says, yes, very good.
And the real tragedy of that smaller version concept is that you are fully aware of the discrepancy.
You know you're being reduced.
You do. The source material analyzes this tension by describing the learner as standing between two distinct worlds.
Oh, right. The native world and the new world.
Yeah. You have the world of your native language, where you are a fully realized, complex adult, and then you have the world of your new language, where you practically have the communicative capacity of an infant.
So right now, as a learner, you are just standing in the void between them.
Exactly. The psychological friction comes from trying to map an adult intellect onto a beginner's vocabulary.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if I feel smaller and I find myself becoming totally silent in a group setting, it feels like I'm failing.
Right.
Does this feeling of having a fractured identity explain why so many learners just go completely mute at dinner parties? Like, are they just giving up because they have nothing to say, or is something more complex happening under the hood?
Oh, it is absolutely never a lack of thoughts.
Hmm.
What is actually happening in the brain of a language learner in a loud group setting is a rapid, intense cost-benefit analysis.
Like a risk assessment.
Precisely. The emotional toll of trying to force a complex adult thought through that beginner vocabulary, translating it on the fly, hoping you don't sound foolish.
And worrying you might entirely derail the momentum of the group's conversation.
Exactly. The brain calculates all of that and just decides the risk is too high. So going quiet isn't giving up. It is an active self-preservation tactic.
It's a protective mechanism to shield the ego from further bruising.
Yeah. But the crucial insight from our source here is that enduring this specific void is not a sign of failure. This space you are in is a bridge, not a home.
A bridge, not a home. I really want you to hold on to that concept if you are listening right now. You are simply in transit.
Exactly.
So if we understand the emotional weight of this identity shift, let's look at the environments where this friction burns the most.
The arenas of isolation.
Right. Our sources break down the specific arenas where this isolation hits learners, starting with the spaces that are ironically supposedly meant for connection social gatherings.
Yeah, these casual environments are highly deceptive. A pub, a dinner party, a coffee break. They seem low stakes, but linguistically, they are minefields.
Because the challenge isn't the textbook grammar you studied in a quiet room. It's slang.
It's half-finished sentences.
Right. It's inside jokes, cultural references, and just the chaotic, overlapping rhythm of casual speech.
It's overwhelming.
It is. You find yourself doing what I call being a ghost in the room. You are physically smiling, you are nodding at the right times, you're projecting this image of comprehension just to avoid being a burden to the group.
But you are entirely unmaterialized in the actual social dynamic.
Exactly. And that ghost in the room dynamic is cognitively devastating.
Let's actually look at the biology of faking comprehension, because it's fascinating. When the auditory channel fails you, meaning you just can't parse the spoken words fast enough, your brain desperately seeks context clues from other sources to compensate.
Oh, so it shifts into overdrive.
Yeah, your prefrontal cortex goes into absolute overdrive. It's scanning facial expressions, monitoring body language, tracking the tone of voice.
Like trying to reverse engineer the meaning of a joke from the laughter of the room?
Exactly. It is a massive dual task interference. You aren't relaxing with a drink. Your brain is running a high-stakes algorithmic simulation just to figure out if you should smile or look concerned.
Which is deeply exhausting.
Incredibly exhausting.
And the fallout from that exhaustion sets up our next major arena perfectly. Because, faking it at a pub is one thing. The stakes are really just your ego.
Right.
But what happens when we move to professional settings? The workplace. Now, the stakes are your livelihood, your reputation, your entire career trajectory.
Yeah, the workplace multiplies the pressure exponentially because the core objective changes. In a social setting, your objective is connection. At work, your objective is proving competence.
Because you were hired, because you're intelligent and capable.
Right. But there is a massive gaping disconnect between your actual capability and how you are perceived by your colleagues because of the language barrier.
Man, the frustration of that must be suffocating. Knowing you have the exact solution to a crisis being discussed in a board meeting, but you literally do not possess the vocabulary to command the room.
To interrupt the flow, articulate the solution.
Yeah, you just sit there and watch someone else stumble into the answer you had 10 minutes ago.
And the imposter syndrome that breeds is so unique. You start to develop this highly specific paranoia that your coworkers are quietly judging your intelligence.
Like they're confusing a lack of vocabulary with a lack of expertise.
Exactly. And to combat this, you start overcompensating. You spend 45 minutes drafting a simple 3-line email. You script out simple phone calls. You rehearse greetings. The isolation at work is deeply rooted in this constant gnawing fear of being underestimated by people you respect.
Which inevitably leads to the most vulnerable environment of all. The quietest one, but heavily documented in our sources, the 2 a.m. thoughts.
Oh, yeah. The spiral.
The party is over, the laptop is shut, you are lying in the dark staring at the ceiling, and the defenses completely drop. The doubts don't just creep in, they rush the gates.
Because the brain is no longer distracted by the immediate demands of processing external language, so it turns its analytical power inward.
It starts replaying everything.
Everything. Every single phonological mistake, every mispronounced word, every awkward silence from the previous 18 hours.
So what does this all mean for someone actively spiraling at 2 a.m., wondering if they'll ever stop feeling like an outsider? We need something more than just acknowledging that it sucks.
Right, we need a mechanism.
Yeah, what is the actual mechanism for pulling yourself out of that spiral?
Well, the first step the source outlines is reframing the transition. But we have to move past vague metaphors here. Think of it less like a caterpillar in a cocoon and more like a computer migrating to a radically different operating system.
Okay, I like this.
Imagine trying to run a high-end video game designed for a Mac on a Windows PC. To make it work, the computer has to run an emulator in the background, a program constantly translating the code in real time.
And that emulator eats up massive amounts of processing power.
Exactly. The fans spin loudly, the battery drains, and the game lags. That is exactly what your brain is doing. You are running your native language thoughts through a mental emulator before they hit your speech motor cortex.
It's uncomfortable, it drains your energy, and it makes you feel slow.
But the discomfort isn't a glitch. It is the literal process of installing the new operating system.
The struggle is the architecture of the new system being built. I love that. But I want to push on this a bit because knowing my brain is installing an update doesn't really stop the loneliness in the moment.
Fair point.
How do we practically shut down the emulator? How do we survive the installation phase without isolating ourselves completely?
So the source provides several structural changes to how we approach learning, starting with community. Specifically, finding fellow learners, not just native speakers.
See, this feels counterintuitive to the whole sink or swim advice we usually hear.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we supposed to immerse ourselves exclusively with fluent speakers to force adaptation?
It sounds good in theory, but total immersion with native speakers often triggers what's called the affective filter.
The affective filter.
Yeah, it's a well-documented neurological blockade. When you are terrified of sounding stupid, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, interprets the social pressure as a literal threat.
Wait, like physical danger?
Basically, yeah. It triggers the release of cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol floods the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain responsible for memory retrieval.
Oh, so the stress physically blocks your brain's ability to access the vocabulary bank you already possess.
Exactly. The words literally vanish.
That perfectly explains the phenomenon where you know a word on a flashcard in your bedroom, but the moment a barista asks you a question, your mind goes entirely blank.
Precisely. The threat of judgment shuts down the retrieval pathway. But when you build a community of fellow learners, you remove the threat. The affective filter lowers. Cortisol drops.
Because you are all making the same mistakes.
Right. The environment feels safe, and suddenly you have full access to your vocabulary again. You actually speak better when you aren't terrified.
But wait, what about the internal pressure? Surrounding myself with other learners might solve the social anxiety, but our sources point out a much more insidious trap comparing chapters.
Ah, yes.
Like I see someone else in my language class who seems to be progressing faster, and I immediately feel isolated again.
Because we constantly compare our messy behind-the-scenes process to someone else's polished results. You are on chapter 1 of your journey, looking at someone on chapter 20.
It's so easy to do.
It is. But we suffer from a sort of collective amnesia regarding fluency. We forget that every single native speaker walking the planet, including you in your mother tongue, spent years as a toddler stumbling through a deeply awkward phase of mangled grammar and mispronunciations.
Fluency is an endpoint, not a starting line.
Exactly. Expecting polish during the installation phase is just a recipe for despair.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because even if I stop comparing myself and I find a safe group of learners, I still have to physically speak the language.
Right.
The source has this incredible analogy about the emulator we talked about. It says that trying to translate everything perfectly in your head from your native language before you speak is like running a marathon with extra weight strapped to your legs.
A great way to put it.
Right. So how do we actually build the neural pathways to drop the weights?
Well, you drop the weights by learning to bypass the translation station entirely. When you translate, you are involving multiple areas of the brain, bouncing a concept back and forth between two distinct linguistic systems.
So to bypass it, you have to start originating thoughts directly in the target language.
Yes.
Give me a concrete example. How do I force my brain to originate a thought in a new language tomorrow morning?
You start with low-stakes micronarrations.
Okay, like what?
Like as you walk into your kitchen, you look at the coffee maker and you think, I am making coffee. The water is hot. You don't think it in your native tongue and then translate it. You force the initial spark of the thought to happen in the new language.
That sounds painfully simplistic. It's
Oh.
silly.
It does. But neuroplastically, you are laying down fresh, direct tracks. You are bypassing the emulator. Over time, those tiny tracks become highways and the lag just disappears.
That makes total sense. We are manually paving the roads. And that brings up the final tool from our sources, which I honestly want to challenge a bit.
Go for it.
The source heavily emphasizes self-kindness. Now, I get the appeal, but isn't self-kindness just a buzzword? Like, if I am constantly giving myself grace for messing up my verb tenses, won't I just fossilize my bad habits?
That's a common fear.
Right. How do you balance being nice to yourself with actual rigorous progress?
It's a vital distinction to make. Self-kindness in language learning is not about lowering your standards. It is about changing your motivational framework.
What do you mean?
Think about it this way. If a dear friend was learning your native language and they used the wrong preposition, would you laugh at them? Would you aggressively question their intelligence?
No, of course not. I'd gently correct them and encourage them to keep going.
Why? Because punitive stress discourages practice.
Oh. So we abuse ourselves in ways we would never tolerate from a teacher.
Exactly. You are distinguishing between accountability and abuse. Holding yourself accountable for learning the grammar is necessary. Berating yourself for a mistake activates that cortisol response we talked about earlier.
The effective filter.
Yes. Self-empathy keeps you in the game long enough to actually achieve fluency. If you hate the process of making mistakes, you will simply stop speaking altogether.
That is a phenomenal reframe. Now, since we are spending so much time talking about the exact words that fail us during these lonely moments, let's pivot to the source's breakdown of specific English idioms.
Oh, the vocabulary of the struggle.
Yes, let's look at it, because the source argues that mastering these phrases gives you immense power over the isolation itself.
Well, naming a psychological state reduces its power over you, right? Acquiring the language of your own struggle gives you agency.
First up, the word we use to describe the 2 a.m. thoughts, to spiral.
In a psychological context, to spiral means your thoughts or emotions are compounding in a rapid, uncontrollable downward pattern. It's a whirlpool effect.
Give me an example.
Like, one minor grammatical mistake in a meeting makes you think you sounded unprofessional, which makes you think your boss noticed, which leads you to conclude you are entirely unemployable.
I messed up the past perfect tense, therefore my career is over. That is a spiral.
Exactly.
The next phrase perfectly captures the workplace arena. Fish out of water.
Think of a fish in its natural habitat. It is graceful, fast, and entirely competent. Remove it from the water, and it is thrashing, awkward, and struggling to survive.
The fish hasn't lost its capability.
Right, the environment has changed. It means feeling completely unequipped for a new setting.
It's the ultimate description for the professional disconnect. You were a shark back in your home office, but here, in a new language, you are a very confused goldfish gasping for air.
Perfectly said.
Next phrase, break the ice.
When you are the learner in the room, the social silence can feel heavy and solid, like thick ice. To break the ice means to relieve that tension.
How does a learner do that?
By making a small, self-deprecating joke about your own language skills, it can instantly shatter that awkwardness, warming up the room and making you feel less alienated.
It takes the power back. Fourth phrase, open up.
This is a phrasal verb meaning to become comfortable sharing your true thoughts or vulnerabilities without protective walls. It is the exact antithesis of that smaller version of yourself.
It's the reward for lowering that effective filter in a safe community.
Yes.
And finally, the ultimate goal, find your footing.
Imagine walking on a slick, uneven surface. You are stumbling, hyper-focused on every single step so you don't fall. That is beginner language learning.
Just trying to stay upright.
Right. Finding your footing means you have finally established a center of gravity. You have gained stability and confidence after a period of intense uncertainty. You aren't constantly looking at your feet anymore. You are looking forward.
What's fascinating here is that language itself becomes the cure for the barrier it created.
It really does. By acquiring these exact idioms, you gain the ability to articulate your vulnerability to native speakers.
And simply telling a colleague, hey, I'm feeling a bit like a fish out of water today, instantly builds a bridge. It invites empathy.
Exactly.
That brings us to the perfect place to close our deep dive today. We've mapped out the cognitive lag, the arenas of isolation, and the tools to bypass the mental emulator.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. But we need to look at this loneliness one last time. We have to stop viewing it as a burden and start recognizing it as a profound victory.
We really must remember that loneliness in this specific context isn't a punishment for incompetence.
Right.
It is indisputable proof that you are doing something incredibly brave and cognitively demanding. True fluency is not forged in the safety of silent flashcards. It is forged in the beautifully messy, deeply awkward process of trying and failing out loud in the real world.
The loneliness is literally just the entry fee for something incredible. If you push through the emulator phase, if you survive the 2 a.m. spirals, you eventually reach a point where you carry two entire worlds inside your head.
Yes. Two distinct ways of expressing complex emotions.
Two different lenses through which to analyze reality.
You aren't just memorizing new audio cues for the same objects. You are acquiring entirely new frameworks for conceptualizing the human experience.
And the price of admission for that expanded reality is temporary discomfort.
Just temporary.
Which leaves me with the final thought I want you, the listener, to really mull over today.
Yeah.
We talked about how agonizing it is when people only get to meet that smaller version of you because of the language barrier.
Uh-huh.
But what if we've been looking at that completely backwards?
Oh, so?
If pushing through this intense, friction-filled isolation eventually grants you a second way of seeing the world, perhaps that smaller version of you isn't actually small at all.
Interesting.
What if this awkward, stumbling in-between phase is secretly forging a completely new, deeply resilient facet of your personality, a facet of your character that your native language, with all its safety and comfort, could never have brought out of you?
Wow.
Think back to that train leaving the station without you. Yes, it hurts to watch it pull away.
Yeah.
But what if, by standing on that platform, fighting the cognitive lag to find the words, you aren't just missing a train?
You are actually building an entirely new set of tracks.
Exactly.
The struggle itself is the material. You're expanding the limits of your own world.
So wherever you are in your language journey today, give yourself the grace to be messy. Keep speaking imperfectly. Remember that you are doing so much better than you think you are. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep building those tracks.